Michael, how are you?
I found something really interesting.
The whole housing market is propped up on these bad loans. They will fail.
The housing market is rock solid.
It's a time bomb.
So Mike Burry, who gets his hair cut at Supercuts and doesn't wear shoes, knows more than Alan Greenspan.
Dr. Mike Burry, yes, he does.
Hello, and welcome to Film Rant. This week we take a look at The Big Short, a biographical comedy drama about the 2007 financial collapse, directed by Adam McKays. I'm a fan of what I've seen of Adam McKays' work. One of my favourite comedies is Anchorman, and I'm a big fan of some of his other works such as The Other Guys and Step Brothers. This movie is a bit of a heavy subject matter for McKays, so I was intrigued to see how he would handle it, especially with the comedy. This review will contain spoilers, so be warned. There are four main characters in The Big Short. Ben Rickett, played by Brad Pitt, Jared Vennett, played by Ryan Gosling, Mark Baum, played by Steve Carell, and Dr. Michael Berry, played by Christian Bale. Each of them has their own special quirk, but we'll start with Christian Bale's character. At the very start of the movie, Ryan Gosling tells us that nobody saw the financial collapse coming except for a few weirdos or outsiders. Because of this, when we see Bale's character, his strange idiosyncrasies tell us immediately that this is a guy who's going to notice. It was a very subtle way to tell us a lot about his character in a short few seconds. Michael is very socially awkward, a little obnoxious, and is a huge fan of heavy rock music. Whether any of these facts are true with a real person is to be desired, but they all work for his character in the movie. He's the kind of guy you like to see on screen but would hate to work with in real life. The first shot we see of him is him sitting at his desk with his headphones in, something we've seen Christian Bale do before. It's simple, but it just shows he's a bit quirky. It's that great filmmaking skill where you can show a character through actions or objects instead of dialogue. Not enough films do it properly, but McKay does it brilliantly in this movie. Michael is a very likeable and enjoyable character to watch. Jared, Ryan Gosling's character, is the narrator of the story. He speaks directly to the audience and is very playful with his words. We get the impression that Jared doesn't really like finance and the people who work in finance, but he does like making money. He sees the financial crisis as an opportunity for heavy personal gain, regardless of the cost to others. He's extremely rude and arrogant, but he's pretty funny and still strangely likeable. We don't see that much of Jared. He's an integral part in Steve Carell's story, but considering he's the narrator and the first person we meet, he's cast to the sidelines quite heavily. That said, there is no real main character. It's more about a group of guys who profit off the greed of banks. Jared was probably the most charismatic and entertaining character in the film for me, even if he was only in it a little bit. Ben Rickett, Brad Pitt's character, is an interesting chap. He's one of those super paranoid guys who always thinks the government is watching them, a bit like how chavs always think the coppers are chasing them.
The fucking police turn up. This was fucking all we needed. Police come down and start grabbing me nana and stuff like that. Me nana's fucking smacking the police all over. I runs over and smack one of the policemen and they grab me, put me in chairs, grab me nana and chuck us all in the back of the police van. Chuck going, I'm not having any of that, I'm not having any of that. So Checker just fucking starts scorpion doing the feel like that. Police helicopter comes flying down like that. Checker sticks his fingers up in the air and here man, fuck off man. The helicopter lands on the grass and the policemen get out. Checker runs, double clotheslines, both of them, climbs in the helicopter and flies off in it. We went to the police station and got arrested. Trevor nicked the helicopter and left it in Humford Woods. We've still got it, we're fly booting it all the time. Till next stream, I'll catch you later. Ta-da.
Ben gets the least screen time, but is still as equally interesting as the other three main characters. He's just as strange as Michael Burry, but has some quirks that play well for comedy, such as having multiple lines to contact him by, and characters have to ring the correct line in order to properly contact him. However, the most interesting thing about Ben is that he seems to be the only one who really acknowledges the fact that his and his accomplices' means of gaining profit will result in screwing over millions of innocent people, forcing them out of jobs and homes. Ben clearly has his head screwed on. He may notice it, but it tells us a lot about his character that he goes through with it anyway. He hates the fact he's ruining some people's lives, but he loves money and screwing over the banks just a little bit more. An ambition that is introduced immediately when we learn how he used to work for Chase, but left in disgust. Which leads me into Mark Baum, Steve Carell's character. Baum is given a little more depth than the other three main characters. We learn near the start that the reason he is so rude, obnoxious and why he simply interrupts people constantly is because he's not dealt with a great personal trauma properly. All the film tells us is that his brother was killed and he hasn't faced what happened. Towards the end of the movie, when the four characters think the financial collapse isn't going to come, he goes home to his wife and talks to her about the trauma to try and move on. We learn that his brother committed suicide while Baum was trying to talk him down. You feel sorry for him for having to go through all this, and he's one of the only characters in the movie you can truly sympathise with. Baum has the biggest conscience when it comes to screwing people over for his own personal gain. He holds off selling his shorts until the other guys have sold theirs to see what impact they have on the economy. Baum originally thought it would be a small crash that would net him a nice profit, but once he realises the crash is basically a global financial crisis, he gets cold feet. He doesn't want to make people lose their jobs and homes. This makes Baum the most relatable character, as he genuinely seems to value the lives of others over his own personal gain, arguably due to the trauma with his brother. On the face of it, it's strange to include a heavy backstory like this about one character, but that's exactly the reason why we see Baum's background. It enables his third act story. The only element of his story that is a little jarring is that he does eventually sell at the end, but I'm led to believe that that was for the benefit of his colleagues and not for his own personal gain. Whether that's how it was done in real life, I don't know, but that's my opinion on him within the context of the film. Now we'll talk about the script. I think it's important to state that I didn't understand all of what the movie was saying, but I still enjoyed it. That's usually a hard thing to do. The Big Short tackles a fairly heavy and arguably boring topic and yet keeps it interesting and entertaining. I left the cinema with a somewhat better understanding of economics and finance, but I'd be lying if I said I understood absolutely everything the movie talks about. However, director Adam McKays knew this would be the case for the majority of the audience. He elects to make fun of bankers and economy nuts by cutting down all of their terminology. Ryan Gosling's character explains a few words and meanings and basically gives us the layman's version of what exactly happened in the 2007 financial collapse. This gives the audience a very basic understanding that sets them up well for the rest of the movie. On top of that, there's some very strange but funny cutaways to celebrities giving us information on the topics. I absolutely loved it when Ryan Gosling just jumps in and says, "I'm guessing you didn't understand that, so here's Margot Robbie in a bubble bath to explain it to you." I mean, Margot Robbie in a bubble bath is enough to get anyone excited, let's be honest, but that cutaway was just so unexpected and it worked tremendously. Some people might find it a little juvenile and disconcerting, but I thoroughly enjoyed this idea. It's like McKay thought, people may be bored by now, so let's explain things with a familiar pop culture face they'll all pay attention to. It's like staring out the window when you're bored and you happen to notice a drunk man face plant into a lamppost. It grabs your attention and it's pretty damn funny. I love McKay's decision to use these cutaways to keep the movie engaging and entertaining. The absolute best aspect of The Big Short is that it did what Wolf of Wall Street neglected to do, and that was villainize the main characters. I know it's mostly a comedy movie, but Wolf of Wall Street doesn't really show Jordan Belfort in a negative light. It portrays him as a hero who's living the dream with boats and hoes. Obviously, Belfort is a very entertaining character to watch on screen, but he is based on a real guy who did most of the basic things the film tells us he did. Belfort went to prison for securities fraud and money laundering, but the film only touches on this briefly at the end. For the rest of the movie, he's shown as an admirable hero who earned his money by being good with stocks. Wolf of Wall Street portrays him similarly to how Grand Theft Auto portrays its main characters.
And you're plainly addicted to chaos.
Well, I'm not sure that's true, Doc. I'm rich, I'm miserable. I'm pretty average for this town.
It's fully established that they are despicable people who should definitely be in prison, but because they're charismatic, funny, or just damn good at what they do, we overlook it. The Big Short does the opposite. The third act focuses entirely on the conscience and motives of the main characters trying to make their big buck. After we learn how they're screwing over the majority of the American population, we see Ryan Gosling sitting at his desk with a check for mad amounts of money. He looks at the camera and simply says, "I never said I was the hero of this story." This resonates against Wolf of Wall Street so strongly as Jared's character is very similar to Jordan Belfort. He saw something nobody else did and made a huge profit. He's rude, selfish and just an all-round dick, but he oozes charisma. But he outright states he isn't a hero, directly to camera. All of the other characters also express that they know they're screwing people over, but do it anyway. The film focuses on the morals of the shorts and characters themselves, instead of skimming over it and saying, who cares, these guys are funny, right? The film wouldn't have succeeded in its main goal if it made the characters heroes, as to me it seems this movie was just about exploiting finance in general. From the banks to the people who profit off the banks and general population. I know Wolf of Wall Street probably had a different message to send, but I love The Big Short for the in-your-face stance it took to show how these bankers and characters are all in it for themselves. I love the fourth wall breaking aspect of The Big Short. Mostly this is done by Ryan Gosling, but there's another character that does it too. Instead of simply narrating, Gosling is actually on screen looking into camera, a bit like an infomercial. When he's talking, he references the audience directly, saying things like, "Most of you probably never understood what really happened," and "I understand you probably don't know what that means, so here's Margot Robbie in a bubble bath." But he also references himself as if he's talking directly to you, such as, "Only a few weirdos and outsiders could see what was coming. I saw it coming. I'm not a weirdo though, in fact I'm pretty fucking cool." I'm not entirely sure why this was used. I think possibly just to make the tone of the film a bit lighter, and to give the audience a sort of familiar safe face to go to. Every time Ryan chimed in with something, it was usually to help the audience understand things better. It was the sort of fourth wall breaking stuff I'm expecting to see in Deadpool. There was only one use of fourth wall breaking that I didn't like, and that was when Jamie and Charlie found out about the possible collapse, and Jamie explained, "Okay, so this didn't really happen. Charlie got told by a friend and I read it in a paper." While I like that the film acknowledged that this wasn't the real case of events, I was also thinking, well, why not just shoot that? It would hardly add a lot to the budget or runtime to just simply film a scene where Charlie is told by somebody and a scene where Jamie is reading a paper and he finds it. The movie ends with the words, "In 2015, several large banks began selling billions in something called a bespoke tranche opportunity, which, according to Bloomberg News, is just another name for a CDO." That was quite a heavy note to end on. It was almost a warning of sorts. Adam McKays basically saying, "Pucker up people, you're about to be as broke as Miley Cyrus's hymen." I thought this was a very effective way to end the film. The Big Short aims to expose the corruption in banks as well as corporate greed, but ultimately it exists to somewhat educate the masses some basics about finance, and that warning at the end wouldn't really make sense had you not watched the movie. You probably wouldn't know what a CDO was, and you wouldn't know the significance of banks selling billions in something called a bespoke tranche opportunity. Hopefully McKay's warning is simply nothing more than that, but that remains to be seen. In terms of the technical aspects of the movie, I would make another comparison to Wolf of Wall Street and say that that movie felt really fictional. It felt like it was the story of a fictional gifted stocks guy who got all he wanted from screwing the stock market a little bit. The Big Short felt much more grounded. Both movies are based on real people and real events, but for some reason The Big Short just felt so much more rooted in the real world. I'd argue that's due to how the movie was made, specifically with the documentary style camera work. From an aesthetic point of view, it did get quite annoying at times because the camera was always very close up to a character or object, and at points it was deliberately out of focus for long periods of time. However, the documentary style really aided the movie in keeping it within the realms of reality. It's not a necessity, but I think McKay made the right choice to shoot it like that. Fans of The Office like myself will be all too familiar seeing Steve Carell shot in a documentary style, so that was a small personal bonus. As well as the camera work, there was also some really cool editing thrown in at various points of the movie. Those edits would usually consist of, I think, real footage of people in despair at losing their home or jobs, and footage of corporate bankers. Sometimes there'd be soldiers in there in poverty-stricken areas. It was very nice to juxtapose images of poverty and wealth in the context of the movie. As I've said before, this movie is mostly about criticising and villainising banks and corporate greed, so these images really aided that mantra. They were cut in a little abruptly at times and the film didn't necessarily need them, but I think they worked well. Another feature that I liked was how McKay chose to split up the three acts with quotes, similar to how The Hateful Eight used chapter cards and The Revenant used long shots of valleys and mountains. Each quote tied into the events that were about to unfold in that act, either with the events themselves or the characters' motivations and personalities in that specific act. Usually I find using quotes in movies very unnecessary or pretentious, but in this case I feel they were used very well. So to round everything up, I'll say that Adam McKay has really impressed me with The Big Short. I've seen his more direct comedies like Step Brothers, The Other Guys and The Glorious Anchorman, but I've never really seen him take on anything that's quite serious. McKay exhibits some very refined craftsmanship in this movie and he really impressed me with some of the technical features he chose. His message in the movie is ultimately to educate people about finance and to also call out banks and corporate greed. The Big Short's main competitor would be Wolf of Wall Street, but to me they're totally different movies. Wolf feels fictional with how much it glorifies Jordan Belfort, whereas The Big Short keeps itself grounded in reality and deliberately makes nobody a hero. I think McKay realised that the subject matter was arguably quite boring and did tremendously well explaining financial terms as best he could with the use of on-screen definitions and funny cutaways to celebrities explaining them. Ryan Gosling, Christian Bale, Steve Carell and Brad Pitt are all absolute delights to watch on screen, and their characters are thoroughly entertaining, well-defined and engaging. The Big Short isn't really a movie you'd want to watch again in a hurry, but it's definitely a very well crafted and well told story that also educates people who know absolutely nothing about finance, like myself. The Big Short gets 4 frames out of 5. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Film Rant.
You're wrong.
We can do everything straight and still go broke.
We need to go all in.
The ratings agencies, the banks...